Good morning, Sonoma County Alliance. Thank you for coming today. We have another fantastic program. My name is Janet Connors, and I was your 2023 president. Before we begin, Kimberly, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And in honor of original indigenous inhabitants, I share the following land acknowledgement. As persons living in Sonoma County and with gratitude, we recognize that we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok, Pomo, and Wapo, who are the original caretakers of this area. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have been stewarding and maintaining relationships on this land as knowledge keepers for millennia. And then before we move to approval of the nominees for the board and the advisory council, I would like to share with you that Ty Mooney had her baby yesterday at 5:05 in the afternoon. His name is Jude Patrick Mooney. So now on your tables, on the back side of the agenda, and there's only a couple on each table, there is a list of the nominees for the board seats and advisory council seats. And I believe we still do have some spots available. So if you're interested in elevating your support, please see me, Paul, or Ty upon her return. So has everybody had a chance to review the nominees? I'll take that as a yes. I would like to entertain a motion from the floor to approve the 2024 nominees for the board.
So moved.
Motion from Marlene Soyland.
Second.
Any discussion? Second from Mick. Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you. So 2023 has been an amazing year with many accomplishments. I look out at this room and I see friends, colleagues, and so many mentors. Thank you. I humbly thank each of you for your support and your guidance. And I want to personally thank the officers, Kimberly Waite, Paul Yeomans, your incoming 2024 president, Ryan Kelly, and Jason Lee for your willingness to collaborate and work to make the Sonoma County Alliance the best that it can be. Scott Kincaid for his tireless work to improve the financial reporting as well as his leadership on SCAPAC. Ty Mooney for her endless passion, energy, creativity, and efficiency. I have truly enjoyed working with her this past year. The board and the advisory council. Man, the input, ideas, and feedback from these two bodies is invaluable. And lastly, I'd like to thank Summit State Bank, my boss, Brandy Seppi, the exec team, and my colleagues for giving me the space and opportunity to work in this role for the Sonoma County Alliance. So now for the accomplishments. Well, first of all, Ty Mooney was promoted to executive director.
Yeah.
We have a new website, yay. Thank you to Ty, Tony Alvarez, Scott Kincaid, and Jake Martini. Our Community Engagement and Safety Rewards Committee, chaired by Ross Liscombe, contributed $6,000 to aid local law enforcement in apprehending 9 violent criminals. And he also spearheaded 3 member fundraising campaigns to support a local soccer team with uniforms and equipment, a local gun buyback program, and the acquisition of the temple massager for the SRPD officers and staff. Our education committee, chaired by Mick Menendez and Jason Lee, donated $2,000 to the Family Justice Center. provided a book vending machine to the Lincoln Elementary School in Santa Rosa, pledged $3,000 to schools rural Sonoma County, and gifted a library bench to the city of Roanoke Park. Our small business grants program, chaired by Marlene Soyland, raised and invested $25,000 into five Sonoma County small businesses. The Programs Committee, chaired by Paul Yeomans and Ty Mooney, brought high-impact discussions to our GMM month after month. The Membership Committee, chaired by Allie Spitzer, Ryan Kelly, and Ty Mooney, inaugurated the quarterly networking event called Biz and Biz, with a special shout out to Annie Sheehan Mayer for making this event happen. Our Political Action Committee, chaired by Scott Kincaid, distributed 3 letters of endorsement backing wildfire victims, reinstatement of school resource officers, and the Our Kids, Our Future initiative. The Environment and Water Committees, chaired by Marlene Soyland and Dick Dowd, continues to collaborate with stakeholders to tackle regional water supply and wildfire issues. The Transportation Committee, and the big note here is the Transportation Committee is back, thanks to Mark Soyland, who has agreed to chair that committee, and we'll be hearing more from them in 2024. And then the DEI Committee, chaired by myself and Gina Lisa Tamayo, launched a video series focused on leadership, celebrating the power of diversity. So it's been a big year. I think it's been a really important, impactful year for us. I have been truly honored to serve as your 2023 president. I believe that 2024 will be another amazing year, thanks to each of you. I have known Paul Yeomans for many years. He is smart, community-focused, and shows up. I know that he will do a fantastic job for the Sonoma County Alliance. And now, before I pass the gavel, I'm told we have to listen to this video.
Good morning, Sonoma County Alliance. Although I can't be with you this morning, I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to celebrate my dear friend Janet Connors as she passes the gavel. Janet and I started our leadership journey simultaneously as we both took on new roles with the Alliance at the start of the year, and it's been both a privilege and an honor to serve alongside her. Janet is an exceptional leader. She steered the ship with unwavering dedication and incredible amounts of grace. Janet has provided mindfulness, passion. She has this unique ability to meet challenges with empathy and understanding, and that ultimately fosters an environment where we can be innovative and we can thrive, and our organization benefits from it directly. So thank you, Janet. Outside of the boardroom, I want to note that Janet is a mentor. She is somebody who supports me far beyond professional responsibilities, and I'm just so grateful for your friendship. So thank you for all of your hard work, and I know in 2024 we will continue the momentum together as you enter the new role as immediate past president. And of course, as we celebrate our outgoing president, I want to welcome our incoming 2024 president, Paul Yeomans. Congratulations. I look forward to a great year in 2024, and I know we're in good hands. As we move forward into the new year, I hope that we can continue to meet challenges and opportunities with an open mind and a growth mindset, and that we can work together to make this the best year yet. So thank you guys so much. Cheers to a new year, and I hope to see you soon.
Bye.
And now it is my distinct pleasure to pass this microphone on to your new 2024 Sonoma County Alliance President, Paul Yeomans.
I can't say much more than what Ty just said about Janet. She is an amazing woman. She's accomplished a lot for Sonoma County Alliance. Her leadership, ours, her passion has really made a difference this past year. And it's going to be difficult to follow her based upon what she's accomplished, but I look forward to working hard and doing my best to serve the Alliance in 2024. With that, just a little something.
Thank you.
So I don't want to talk too much about 2024, but having Ty Mooney as a part of being our executive director is amazing. Her energy, her drive. She got us together at the end of last year to talk about a strategic plan with the board. And what she put together, I'm looking forward to sharing with you over this following year. A good portion of that, though, is going to be your participation in the strategic plan. And you'll learn more about that, but as a membership organization, it takes all of us to grow and to be strong. And we're going to be looking towards you to make that happen. So thank you. And Janet, thank you again. I appreciate it. So with that, we have our program sponsor today, Common Ground Society, and we have Larkin O'Leary here with a small presentation.
All right, I'm not as tall as him, so I'm standing on tippy toes to see you. No. Okay, so my name is Larkin O'Leary, and I am a local teacher. I was born and raised here in Sonoma County, and
What help you needed that?
I'm gonna hold it. I think that'll be easier. It is there. Hi, there is a front row. I am a local Sonoma County born and raised wife, mother, and teacher. This is my family. Peter is a teacher in Rincon Valley, and then we have June Bell, who's 4 years old, and James, who is 9 years old. Most recently, I found myself the COO and co-founder of Common Ground Society. We are a local nonprofit that never intended to exist, but here we are. There is a deep desire in our community to learn and grow and be supportive of our entire community. And the community that I'm talking about includes those people who have disabilities, medical complexities, or any sort of unique need. What began as a simple presentation about Down syndrome with my friend Jessica to our kids' preschool classes has grown in a way we never imagined. Since that presentation in 2018, we've hit over 61,000 students in various presentations about visible and invisible disabilities and medical complexities, challenging our students to be the one to just say hi and empower them with the tools to do so confidently. We've done nearly 100 presentations to our community, including California SELPA, Sonoma County Office of Education, and Kaiser Grand Rounds, to name a few, as well as about 60 of those to Sonoma State to future teachers. We use our vulnerable stories from being passionate educators who loved all of our students but didn't understand how to teach all kids until we had a connection with our kids, and seeing them for the humans they are and helping to shift mindsets to help our community see the strength that lies in our diversity. At the same time as that first presentation, we were looking for local support. Although our kids had Down syndrome and there's an amazing Down syndrome community here in Sonoma County, I was going through something much different. My son, who had Down syndrome, also had a variety of medical complexities. He's had 30 surgeries and hundreds of days in the hospital. And although I was surrounded by a sea of support from my local hometown, I felt desperately alone. Having to come home with oxygen and G-tubes for my son and caring for him with nobody who really got it. Until I created a small Facebook group of people I had met in the hospital and my friends who had kids with any sort of unique need. That group has grown to over 920 local Sonoma County caregivers of kids with any sort of hard left in parenting. We have 117 different diagnoses in our group. We have 10 different touch points like family meetups, moms meetups, dads meetups, for families to come together and find people who get it. We provide hospital bags to our families going in for surgeries or long stays. So How can you get involved? We invite you to learn about our presentations, our volunteer opportunities, and our annual gala, which we are currently seeking sponsors. There is a handout on your table so you can sign up to be the first to know about our gala. It sells out very quickly, and we would love to have your support. So thank you so much for taking the time to learn about Common Ground Society. Don't forget to go out there and be the one. Thank you.
Thank you, Lark, and what a beautiful thing you do for the community and the children. So let's see if I can do this right. All right. It's always a little nerve-wracking the first day, so give me a moment. I want to thank our program sponsor. So thank you, Larkin, for sharing your story. Thank you, Don and Alejandro of Sound Ideas, for the help you do every week. And thank you to the sustaining members for participating and being part of Sonoma County Alliance. With that, I'd like to go into introductions, and Janet, if you can help. I'll lead off. Paul Yeomans, Exchange Bank.
Test. And so I'll ask each table to stand, and then if you have a guest, please give me your guest business card.
Amy Bolton, Christopherson Builders.
Scott Kincaid, Facility Development Company.
Kathy Goodacre, CTE Foundation.
Chris Fiscalini, Comerica Bank.
Chris Wilson, Historic Railroad Square Association.
Dee Swanheiser, Greenbelt Alliance.
Thank you. Please stand. I'd like to introduce my guest, Mayor Keisha Smith, the City Manager for the City of Santa Rosa.
Rob Eyler, Sonoma State University.
Paul.
Andrea Cohen, Boys and Girls Clubs of Sonoma and Marin.
Kelly Back, Exchange Bank. Rex Barney, Holly Construction.
Corey McCormick, Holly Construction.
Justin Hunter, lots of Holly Construction.
Mick Menendez, not Holly, but Pacific Advisors.
Good morning.
Gary Wentz, Loan Depot Home Mortgage.
Harry Davidian, Antec Power.
Nicolette Weinsfeld, North Coast Builders Exchange. Valeska Maravato, North Coast Builders Exchange.
Lisa Wicki-Schaffner, lots of North Coast Builders Exchange.
Patty Rowland, Marcom. Sean Madison, Madison Marcom.
Frank Pip, Grass Commercial Real Estate. And I have a guest, Jeffrey Mallon, Forensic CPA.
She's just coming down from a long year, so. In the Frankie Architect.
Oh, my goodness. Good morning.
Good morning, Brett Shin, Providence Health. I have two guests today. I have Koshik Roy from Providence Health as well, and I have Lynn Stanton from Emergency Prep Health.
Bill Bolster, Electro-Optical Components.
Good morning, Dana Ghirardelli, Sonoma County Farm Bureau.
Scott Atkins, Summit State Bank.
Linda Bone, Summit State Bank.
Good morning, Gary Ploss, recovering politician, Fowler Associates.
Terry Fowler, Fowler Associates, and Liberty Belmont.
Good morning.
Kaylin Knudsen, Common Ground Society. Larkin O'Leary, Common Ground Society.
Morning, John Cregan, Santa Rosa Chief of Police.
Ross Lipscomb, Real Estate Broker, Century 21.
Good morning, Greg Hurd of BKF Engineers.
Artie Dexter, LeDuc and Dexter, and Super Service Plumbing.
Mark Stapp, Sonoma State and Santa Rosa City Council.
Lisa Badenfort, North Bay Association of Realtors.
Farah Butaro, broker, Sonoma Coast Living, and also Bodega Bay and Beyond Vacation Home Rentals.
Dan Condren, member of SCA
Joe Gaffney, St. Vincent de Paul. I have 3 guests this morning. First is my wonderful wife, Stephanie Bodie. And then next to her, I have Dave Johansson, who is a retired Director of Sales and Business Development for an information technology consulting firm. And his wife, Carol Aaron, retired Chief Administrative Officer for Peace Health, a nonprofit health system in the Northwest, where she now serves on the board.
Victor McKnight, Risk Strategies.
Kimberly Waite, Redwood Credit Union.
Steve Bertlebow, Friends of Smart.
Chuck Root, Double Eagle Financial.
Rob Sanville, KLH Consulting.
Pete Liskier Engineers.
Carrie Chambers, Community First Credit Union, and my guest today is Mike Rossetti from Rossetti Insurance Agency.
Katie Dillwood from Christofferson Builders.
Eric Schmies, Golden State Lumber.
Tracy Emmerich, Leap Solutions Group.
Don Mills, Sound Ideas Media.
Ryan Kelly, WSI Digital Marketing.
Good morning, David Brown, Adobe Associates, Civil Engineers and Land Surveyors.
Roy Martinez, Exit Strategist Group.
Rick Carlisle, BKF Engineers.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bianca Bruce with Bianca Bruce Business and Branding Agency, and I have 2 guests, Heather Nelson with the Connection Hive and Samantha Paul with Planning and Consulting.
Hi, good morning. Keenan McCullough with MP Law. Andre Moran with Broad Jane Race Consulting Engineers.
Ramsey Brown with Exchange Bank.
Good morning, Carly Rodriguez, Midstate Construction.
Mark Nelson, Midstate Construction.
David De Los Santos with TLCD Architecture.
Crystal Vega with 707 Promotions.
Brett Shields, ZFA Structural Engineers.
Happy New Year, Chuck McPherson with Leap Solutions Group.
Hi, Priscilla Locke, Director of Development and Communications at the Humane Society of Sonoma County, and I'm very pleased to introduce my guest, Catherine McGovern, our new Development Manager.
Good morning, all. Claudia Vecchio, Sonoma County Tourism.
Conrad Vaganza with Sonoma County Tourism.
Ryan Stiles, Engel and Volkers Real Estate.
Carl Service, TLCD Architecture.
Howard Dalton is semi-retired, but still doing lots of stuff.
Amen. Danny Sheehan with the Friends of Smart, and I want to welcome Bianca Bruce as a new member. Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. Diva Marie Proto, Sonoma County Clerk, Recorder, Assessor, and Registrar of Voters. And I have 2 guests, Amanda King, our Chief Deputy Clerk Recorder, and Rhiannon Yeager, our Chief Deputy Assessor.
Juan Nieto with Vanguard Properties here in Santa Rosa.
Hi, I'm Brianna Morrison, Landscape Architect at Carlo Macy. I'm a guest of Mark Hale, who could not make it this morning. Tracy Russo, Hogan Land Services.
Good morning, Ryan Bucksbaum, Next One Staffing.
Good morning, Tom Kostowski, Affordable Housing Associates, Santa Rosa.
Good morning, Jeff Owen, Exchange Bank.
Ron Edwards, Healdsburg City Council.
Thank you. Marlene.
Marlene Soyland, Soyland Management.
Good morning, Scott Omrod, Leap Solutions Group.
Jason Lee, Sonoma County Office of Education, and I have a guest with me today, Jeanette Perkins from Living Wine Country.
Miguel Andrade Marin, Golden State Lumber.
Haley Bly, Boys and Girls Clubs of Sonoma Marin.
Vinny Bly of Smith Dollar.
Tony Spisman with 707 Promotions, and I have a guest. This is Nick Aegis from the Redwood Empire Food Bank.
Sandra Wimmerod, Sotheby's International Realty.
Hi, I'm John Anderson with Anderson Architecture and Planning.
I'm Ingrid Anderson from Anderson Hedgepeth Architecture and Planning.
Lisa Carino from United Way of the Wine Country.
Melissa Durlow, Nelson Connects.
Steve Click, Bauer Associates.
John Adai, Leap Solutions Group.
Morning, Aaron Smith with Adobe Associates.
Kimberlyn Moffett from Community Matters.
Erica Vogel with Community Matters.
Phoebe Ellis, Lace House Linen.
Leslie Simmons, CTE Foundation.
Thank you, everyone. And my name is Janet Connors with Summit State Bank. So, Rob, would you like to pick 2 business cards from there? Catherine McGovern and Bianca Bruce. Please come up for your card.
Well, all I can say is we are thrilled to have Dr. Rob Eyler here today, this morning, a good friend of the Sonoma County Alliance Group. We are pleased to welcome him back. He always provides tremendous insight into our local economy in a clear and concise manner. Dr. Eyler is a professor of economics at Sonoma State University and works with Marin Economic Forum. And he asked me to cut his intro short so that we can get him up here, talk about what we really want, and have much more time for questions. So Dr. Eyler, please come on.
Well, folks, thanks for having me back, and good morning and Happy New Year. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk us through my take on the national economy, to a certain extent the state economy, and then talk about certain parts of the Sonoma County economy looking forward to a certain extent, but also think about, okay, what are some leadership challenges that are out there for Sonoma County and really the North Bay? And a lot of them are very related, as I'll talk about, at least from my perspective. What I usually start with is the labor market. The main reason we have not had a declared recession again in the United States since May 2020 is because the labor market has shown a lot of heat coming out of the pandemic recession and continuing forward. I usually like to compare that to the Great Recession. So that blue bowl is the evolution of the American labor market from November 2007. If you set the number of people working in the United States at 100 in November 2007, it took 78 months to get back to that same aggregate number of people working in the United States. That's what we call the Great Recession, the Great Recession. And you can see how long that bowl was. That red dotted line is basically the pre-recession benchmark. And if you compare that to the pandemic recession, this is the evolution of the American labor market basically from January 2020 on a seasonally adjusted basis to November 2023, at least the preliminary data. So that black line continuing to walk up, and though it's at a decreasing rate, it continues to increase. We're going to get data on Friday that should suggest we saw more growth again. It's slowing down though. And I'll talk about why it's slowing down, what that may mean looking in the forecast, and what the forecast is suggesting is going to be where the pain's going to be felt over the next, let's say, 12 or 18 months, and why. But part of that's the labor market in terms of its continued evolution and whether or not we actually see severe job changes, and there's no economist out there that suggests we're going to see that change. The labor market's heat is related to both supply and demand. On the demand side, we have businesses that are looking for workers across the board, and those job openings remain relatively elevated. And on the supply side, we have seen a shift in labor force participation rates. And so we don't have as many people working. We've also seen migration away from California specifically that has changed the labor market here, even though that is shifting back to a better balance. So one of the things that I get asked a lot about is inflation, and there's a specific measure of inflation I'm going to show you here because the Federal Reserve is looking at this measure of inflation when it thinks about what it's going to do with interest rates. It's called core personal consumption expenditures prices, which is a gigantic mouthful to say. That's the evolution of that data those data from January 2007 forward. So the blue solid line on that graph, hopefully you can see that. It's a little deep for the people in the back maybe. But if you can see that blue solid line, those data are monthly on a seasonally adjusted basis from January 2007 forward. And what they measure is they measure the percentage change in what it costs you to buy goods and services at home, looking back 12 months. So it's a percentage change over the last 12 months in the cost of buying everything you buy at home. But we call it core because out of that basket, I'm going to pull out food and energy products and services, and that's what makes it core. There's actually, just as a quick sidebar, there's another measure that's been running around the last 12 or 15 months that economists tend to use historically a little bit, called supercore, which you take out housing as well. But after you take out housing, food, and gas, is you're getting down to like sort of the nubs of what you buy at home to a certain extent, at least what is, you think what you buy every month. So after that, it gets a little weird to measure it any lower than that. But core is followed because food and energy prices historically tend to be a little bit more volatile, and you don't want to make a policy mistake by seeing 3 months of elevated prices because of a food change or some food market change or some energy market change that then comes back down to earth quickly because the problem's resolved. So economists tend to look at core prices. The personal consumption expenditures price index is meant to cover everything you buy. So that evolution has seen some very violent change, let's say since the middle of 2021 forward, and is still relatively elevated, though it's been on the down slope. And you can see that here through at least October. The November data actually is a little bit lower than that at 3.2%. But what may be actually more relevant for what we're talking about looking forward is what the forecast is. So the Federal Reserve is forecasting that these data will actually move closer to that blue dotted line, which you might be able to see, it looks like that elevated vertical or horizontal line on that graph, toward what they think should be price expectations in the United States. So when you do central banking right, what you've done is you basically shape the expectations around inflation in labor markets in such a way that businesses and households know what decisions to make in terms of investment and growth moving forward, specifically in hiring. When that becomes more volatile, it makes for a trickier forecasting environment, it makes for trickier decision making. You just cannot form expectations the same way, and that's the real issue in terms of what we've seen with prices. The volatility of it has really sent financial markets all over the place, has sent labor markets really a little bit on a groove that has really not changed that much, but what we're concerned very much about is those prices fall. What's that mean in terms of some of the price or some of the labor changes we're going to see, what that means for a change in consumption. So that forecast is looking to see that the price index fall continue down toward 2%, and what we're watching for is we're looking whether or not that's going to continue. It is forecasted, as we'll see in a minute, to continue, and a lot of that's because we're going to have some pain somewhere. So the idea is that when inflation is elevated, it starts to change the way we consume at home, it starts to change the expectations of businesses, and it should start to change labor markets. We have not really seen that labor market change, and it's kind of baffled economists, as you're going to see in the forecast we're going to show in just a minute. The second thing is that we should see rates change. So the signal right now is that rates are going to change down in sometime in 2024, and the Federal Reserve's minutes from their previous meeting are going to come out, and there's going to be a lot of analysis and a lot of hand-waving about what that all means. The bottom line is the Federal Reserve is not going to lower rates that they set, which is really the rate that banks lend to each other, until we see those price indices continue to fall down toward that blue dotted line, and unfortunately we see more labor market problems than we currently are seeing. So that increase at a decreasing rate, which is going to get slower, the Federal Reserve really wants to create job losses, because that's the real force behind inflation, which sounds really nasty, is that if I can create more unemployment, I create lower inflation. And that's the nasty trade-off that economists face when you think about where the economy is going and how to talk about how policy moves make those changes. So we need to see those job losses or those job changes, and then we're going to see that continued fall. Those are the things that the Federal Reserve wants to see, and has really been shaping through these higher rates that we've seen since now 2 years ago. If we look at rates and their evolution, I'm going to try to show you from November 1981. So one of the big questions I also get asked is, well, are rates going to go up to some point that we saw way back when? How many people in here had a mortgage that actually was at a rate above 10%? Okay, so some of y'all remember that time. For a lot of my students, especially those that were 18 in 2008, they have not really seen a protracted period in which you've had relatively high mortgage rates. And so one sort of existential question about interest rates is whether or not, if I believe that rates are going to go back down to 3.25% for a mortgage, why would I take a mortgage at 7%? And what's that going to mean for housing markets? What's it going to mean for the growth of business? What's that mean for our communities that people are not willing to root themselves? And what's that mean for rental markets on the other side of it? So those are some broader sort of rhetorical questions. We don't have a strong answer to that, but we have to be thinking about what's the mentality about interest rates and what that means if you look forward, especially if you're a younger person who really doesn't have a memory or was not alive at a time when rates were relatively elevated. But we have to have some historic perspective. So I'm going to show you two perspectives. One, the main way in which economists use rates to forecast the future is to think about the spread between long-term treasuries and short-term treasuries. And there's a lot of arguments about what spread you should really watch. We usually don't argue that the 10-year treasury is the one we look at long-term rates. The short-term rates sort of move around between the 2-year treasury and the 3-month treasury. The data suggests that the difference between the 10-year treasury rate and the 3-month treasury rate, and basically what the government pays for long-term debt and short-term debt respectively, is the most prescient of where we're going in terms of the economy. So if you take the social shutoff of COVID-19 and the pandemic recession into account, 11 of the last 13 recessions have had this blue line go below zero before that recession, about 9 to 12 months before. So it's meant to sort of suggest, well, when that blue line, the difference between long-term and short-term rates, dips below zero, you have what's called a yield curve inversion, and that inversion should lead to some credit crunch somewhere, enough to where it's going to slow down growth, slow down spending and hiring, and thus slow down the economy. And you can kind of see, at least over the last few recessions, that blue line has gone below zero, and then we get a recession relatively soon thereafter. The only difference there is that if you look at the far right-hand side in the really skinny shaded area, which is the COVID-19 recession, that blue line did go below zero in 2019, but you can't really say that's what created the recession conditions. Now, this is the Federal Reserve rate since 1981, and you can see how crazy it was coming out of the double-dip recession of the 1970s or early 1980s, when you actually may have a memory of hearing people that had mortgages, or maybe you actually had one, at somewhere in the 13, 14, 15% range. That was that time. Came down quickly. We kind of learned a lot of lessons from the 1970s and early 1980s, and the 1990s, 2000s, 2010s were kind of a glorious period of central banking where we sort of shaped the economy. But you can also see, though, a couple of anomalies. One, if you look at where that really wide shaded area is, which is the Great Recession, you can see the black line is flat for a really long period of time. That's a so-called zero lower bound. Do you remember that the Federal Reserve pushed interest rates all the way down to its lowest possible level right after the Great Recession was apparent in the American economy, and kept it there for years. And then we started this slow lift off in about 2014, and in fact, if you remember the first graph we showed, the bowl, that blue bowl that represented the Great Recession in the labor market, actually ended about the same time that the Federal Reserve began to lift off. And we re-experimented with it again as a result of the pandemic. So we've had a lot of periods of time over the last, let's say, 15 years in which we've had basically the lowest possible interest rates in terms of what banks are facing when they lend to each other, and then we've had very low interest rates otherwise in other markets. So how much we can expect people to remember that time and expect it to come back is a big question looking forward for financial markets. Okay, so let's look at a sort of an anomalous idea in terms of what's been happening with rates and inflation kind of jammed together. If you look from 1994 on a monthly basis, I'm going to show you the deposit growth at banks and show you how wild it's been over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years. A lot of the banking industry is starting to look at what's happening with deposits, and the innards of banking has really become almost a chase for deposits. And so you can see here that the blue line, which has kind of lingered around 5% growth on an annualized basis since the 1990s, saw some wild action after that final shaded area on the far right. Part of that was because we had 2 tranches of fiscal stimulus that came to our homes, and that created an enormous amount of increase in deposits for 2 reasons. One, the federal government gave us a bunch of cash, and so we saw people put it in the bank, and that picked up deposits. But the second was didn't necessarily have any place to spend it initially. It came to us, and a lot of our budget was contracted because we had some social restrictions. When those restrictions started to lift, we started to see some come down in those deposits, and the deposit movement down happened in sort of 2 big ways. One, we reopened the economy, and that's sort of the fall 1. Fall 2 happened when inflation kicked up and people started to liquidate deposits because what it cost them per month was rising. And that has continued throughout the last 2 years. And you can see that actually has dipped below zero for the last, let's say, 6 months. But you can see that on the far right-hand side. It's actually somewhat unique to have a situation in which the annual growth of deposits on a month-to-month basis has actually been negative. So if you do talk to your local banker or credit union, they're going to talk a lot about the chase for deposits and what's that mean. And what it means is that banks become a little bit more reticent to lend because they don't know A, where they're going to get the funding, and B, they don't want to put the funding they have at high risk. And they're going to be very certain, or they're going to want to be more certain about the risk, and that's going to slow the process down, because that's the classic output of this. Now, this is actually the savings rate in the United States. And if you can see, these tend to track a little bit, but the point is you can see on the far right-hand side, I'm going to remove that and then put it back again. A lot of movement upward in terms of savings. Again, same idea as a result of the pandemic, that the savings rate is down now to its lowest level in 20 years. In other words, if I hand you one more dollar of income and you pay taxes on that dollar of income, what you save from that dollar of income that's left, your disposable income, is at its lowest percentage in the last 20 years. The reason? Part of it's inflation. Part of it's the fact that we have just been consuming as if we just are making up for lost time. But the bottom line is that when you have low savings rates and you have deposit problems, both of those are, in a sense, precursors to problems in the economy. They have to be, not only now, but later. A lack of savings means a lack of investment in economies, and that means slower growth going forward. Okay, so another piece, in thinking about lending markets, and we're going to hear a lot about housing and lending in the 2024 economy and probably beyond the presidential election, because those will be the two big things of whether or not we so-called soft land as a result of the pandemic, our policy reactions to the pandemic, and where we're going to go forward. Part of it's now starting to look at what's happening with delinquency rates. So economists tend to look at 90-day delinquency rates, or how long, or if you are now 90 days delinquent on a part of your debt, what percentage of the amount of that debt is actually gone 90-day delinquent? Credit cards are up. Home equity lines of credit and mortgages are not. I'm going to show you this. Mortgages are going to be last, but student lending market's absolutely crazy. So we have not seen much delinquency increase in the student lending market because we basically turned off the necessity of paying that back. I'd be very curious to see if we go back to sort of the natural trend, which is one of the highest delinquency rates in the debt markets, in the United States at least, over the last 10 or 15 years, or if we're able to kind of, in a sense, shape how delinquency happens as people start to repay their student debts. But one thing I can tell you from the data is this. Folks that have relatively high student debts did not necessarily take the pause in student debt payments to pay down the principal on that debt. They used it basically as a pause on outflow, not a pause and restructuring of their balance sheet at home. So it'll be very intriguing to watch what happens, and most economists believe we will get very close back up to those relative highs in about 10% delinquency over the next 18 months. And some of that does depend probably on the presidential election and whether or not debt forgiveness will become a more broad reality. We will see. But there's auto loan rates, or auto loan delinquencies have picked up a little bit, but mortgages and home equity lines of credit, which are the two lines at the bottom, have really not changed that much. So one of the things I do get asked a little bit is, are we expecting a repeat of 2007, 2008 in terms of the real estate markets? And the answer is, in the residential side, probably not. But I'll talk a little bit more about commercial in just a minute. So let's look at the forecast, at least for the next couple of years. Every quarter, the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia, they interview 40 forecasters, and these people, all they do is watch the American economy. And they ask them, well, what do you think is going to happen with three specific variables? One is real GDP growth, or income after inflation, and what's going to happen there. These data were put together in November 2023. The shaded column in each one of these stops is the latest forecast, and what the Federal Reserve is really using when they're thinking, what are we going to do with policy going forward? So the column to its left, which is not shaded but called previous, is what happened in the previous quarter. Why that's important is because forecasters tend to use the new data in such a way that they're going to make some changes. And some of those changes are big and some of them are small, as you're going to see in just a minute. One, we saw an upgrade with the 2023 data, which we don't know in full yet, even though the year just ended. We have probably a little bit more growth. The third quarter really surprised economists of how strong the growth estimates were, and that's likely to prevail in terms of the annual forecast and ultimately the annual resolution of what happened in 2023. But we also picked up what's going to happen for this year. Now, notice that 1.7% growth is relatively low, but it was 1.3% growth in the previous column before that. So it's gotten better. And one way of describing the way economists have looked at the last couple of years is in this rolling window of pain. Meaning that we thought things were going to be bad in 2023 and they weren't, but we know they've got to be bad at some point. So we're sort of rolling that window forward on a quarterly basis. The data were better than we thought. Okay, let's roll it forward another quarter. They're better than we thought. Let's roll it forward. And it doesn't really provide a lot of credence in the way we do forecasting, but it does suggest that the shadow effects of the pandemic and the policy choices we made and the sort of classic textbook harbingers of problems are still there. And that pain has got to be felt at some point. The big thing is how much pain is going to be felt and how long. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But we will see what happens in terms of when that pain really starts to show. However, if that pain starts to show, labor markets are going to be kind of the place we say, okay, now we see the pain. As I showed you before at the very first slide, we haven't really seen much of that yet, and that's why we have this rolling window another 8, 9, 12 months in the distance. The unemployment rate, which is one sort of tricky measure of what's really going on in labor markets, these forecasters suggested, yeah, we're going to see a lift across the board, and every single year looking forward toward 2026, they're expecting higher unemployment rates. But those unemployment rates at 4.1, 4.2, even at 4.5% are extremely strong labor market activity. So it's not like you're going to get this sudden surge in people, this swath of folks that are suddenly unemployed in large numbers. But part of that is, unfortunately, from a dismal science standpoint, because we've lost labor force. People have walked away from looking for a job. So the amount of people that can be unemployed has shrunk. And we'll see if that comes back. So some of that, take with a grain of salt when you hear about the unemployment rate rising a little bit, because in California it has increased, and I'll come back and talk about this in just a second. How much of that is really a function of either migration changes or people have actually removed themselves from the labor force? These data on prices, which is again that core PCE inflation, are the same data we saw in the red dots in the forecast in the 2 slides ago, or a few slides ago. Same deal, sort of slowly sliding down toward 2%. Hopefully we will get there by 2025, but it's still going to be a slow ramp down. And the main thing to realize about that is while inflation is slowing down, it still lingers. And think about what inflation really is, right? It's a percentage change in prices from the previous year. So if you had 9%, let's say 2 years ago, and now it's down to 3%, wow, that's a lot of relief. But it has compounded what happened 2 years ago, and so the prices are still higher than they were 2 years ago, not relieving you back down. Do not expect those prices to come sliding suddenly back down to what they were pre-pandemic, and this is especially true for wages. Wages are now elevated, and they're not going back. I mean, imagine, are you going to be able to say to somebody, I'm paying you 21 bucks an hour, and now that inflation's gone down to 2%, we're going to roll you back to 18? There's no way. Right? So we need to be realistic about the cost of doing business and how elevated it is, and we think about Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties, because I try to think about these as a region and not really pick one out of the other. We're not going back to some pre-pandemic level of cost of living anytime soon. And really at all. We shouldn't expect that at all. But the resilience in the American economy is probably the biggest story in terms of the post-pandemic world. We expected to have some broader contraction by now as economists, and it just hasn't quite happened yet. And part of that's a lot of things happening in terms of equity markets and housing markets showing strength and people consuming from that wealth alongside of the job market remain relatively firm. Okay, so let's now move to the regional side. Some data came out in December in 2 ways. One was to look at what happened with income growth in 2022. And so what I like to do is I try to think about the pandemic as a benchmark and a change in the way we do business. So if I look at the change in how much income we have after inflation from 2019 to 2022, so basically the post-pandemic period. These are California on the far left-hand side, which grew about 7% after inflation. So the total income we have in California after we take inflation into account since 2019 grew about 7%. For San Mateo, Santa Clara counties, both of those are around 20%, a little bit higher in the case of Santa Clara County. But if you look from left to right, which are the fastest growing counties in California to the slowest growing counties, a lot of the slower growing counties are populated by the North Bay, but with a little bit of an anomaly with Los Angeles County in the middle of that group at the end. And part of that's because a lot of people left Los Angeles County and moved to other places. And that problem still lingers in Los Angeles labor markets. So if you think about this area, the North Bay, we tend to be a slower growth, slower moving economy, partially because we have a relatively large agricultural bend here, but we still have issues in terms of just gaining access to what you can think of as frontier technology jobs and keeping them into the long term. That's not a problem for Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, and that's reflected in those growth numbers. So I'm going to try to show you quickly what's going on in labor markets in California and also Sonoma County as a microcosm of what goes on in the North Bay. This is the labor force evolution in California and the number of people that are available for work or are working in some is the left-hand axis or the vertical axis. So somewhere just around 19 million people in California. But notice, over the 2010s, and these numbers are seasonally adjusted from January 2010 forward, moving up toward that pre-pandemic peak, sharp cut, a little bit of a comeback, a second cut, and then this slow sort of wobbly walk up toward where we sort of peaked in mid-2022, and we've basically been flat ever since. So that's the people that are available for work. And part of that little lift at the very end was that people were moving back to California. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. This is the people that are working that live in California. Now that's an important distinction, as we're going to see more completely when we talk about Sonoma County in a minute. The way labor data works is it lives in sort of two big groups. One group, when you hear about the unemployment rate, that is measuring the people that live in a place, okay, as part of the labor force that lives in an area. So these are people that have a job that live in California, okay? Now that distinction is important because the next graph I'm going to show you is this one, which are the people that have a job based on a California employer. So let me walk backward. Two things about this. One, same deal. Up to a peak after 2010 and coming out of the Great Recession, sharp cut down because we had a lot of unemployment originally, and then we saw some pick back up and basically almost back to pre-pandemic levels of employment in California. But notice how flat that's been. California basically has created no new residential workers in the last 16 months, according to these data. So in essence, what the Federal Reserve is trying to do at the national level, California has reflected that outcome. Basically zero growth, slow the economy down, and let's get inflation under control. Okay, that's happened in California. You can't say that's happened around the United States just yet. Now, again, these are, pardon me, people that live in California and have a job. These are people that work for a California-based employer. So if you look at what happened pre-pandemic and look at the gap that exists between the people that work for a California-based employer and the people that live in California and have a job, right? California used to be a place that worked for other places. Okay? People lived here and worked globally. Now it's flipped, and the number of people that work for a California-based employer is actually a little bit higher than the number of people that live in California and have a job. Why? Yeah, they live some other place regardless of its cause or rationale. We are now hiring people to work in a California-based California-based employer that lives some other place. That is a new phenomenon. If I took those data all the way back in recorded time, you'd never see that gap close. Okay, so that's a new change for California. Okay. If you look at Sonoma County, however, Sonoma County has not quite recovered its labor force, has not quite recovered the number of people that have a job that live in Sonoma County, nor is it 100% come back in complete in certain industries, but has come back in the aggregate in terms of the number of people working for a Sonoma County-based employer. But it's the same problem. We have seen people that have left Sonoma County, but we still are a place that people live and work some other place. That gap has not closed. So we've gone through this really weird post-pandemic change in not only where people have gone, but how people have worked for their employer. And that continues. It is a good thing that Sonoma County has seen jobs pick up. It's not good that we haven't recovered the residential employment base. However, that depends on your perspective, and I'll come back and talk about that when we talk about housing. So real quick on industries. This is industry hiring in Sonoma County. If you look at what happened as a result of the pandemic, it's very rare in economic history, in American economic history, to have a change lead to general contractions across all industries. So for Sonoma County, April and May 2020, which are these first two columns, short of farming, which we saw a little bit of a pickup in terms of jobs there, saw basically job cuts across the board. By December 2022, we had actually recovered in a couple industries, and it was only until in 2023 that we actually got aggregate recovery of the labor market in Sonoma County. And this is where we are in the latest data as far as October goes. So we got a lot of positive numbers there with respect to January 2020, which is the pre-pandemic benchmark. So think of these data as, well, how do they compare to right before the pandemic set in? We've grown, which is good. Okay? We have a couple little anomalies here, like wholesale and retail. We haven't quite come back yet. And part of that's because we haven't had, the wine industry has this weird relationship with wholesale in the sense that if you have a lot of distribution, if those distribution endpoints have closed or you have shrunken demand there, you're not going to see as much flow. And historically speaking, for Sonoma and Napa counties, wholesale is very much driven by what happens in the wine industry in terms of volume. But the bottom line is that for most of these industries, we've had to come back. which is good. Okay? So, but it shows you that there are some anomalies within the Sonoma County economy we haven't quite completely recovered. Retail is one I'll come back to in a minute. Let's shift to housing. If we look at housing, this is the last year, and if that red dotted line is at 0, so last year was a relatively tough year in residential real estate markets, but I say that relatively speaking, right? So this is last year, last 12 months, thinking November, looking back, those are the latest data. And you can see San Francisco's down about 6.5%, Mendocino's down about 9% last year, but this is the 2-year or 3-year run. So over the last 3 years, we've seen relatively strong residential housing markets, even though Mendocino now has actually collapsed a little bit, and San Francisco has still struggled a little bit in terms of recovering price. Sonoma County, which you can see at 17.8%, I signaled that out, is relatively good, but it's all relative. If we had done this, when I showed you this last year, if you were here last year, it was around 30% in Sonoma County. So things have flattened out quite a bit in terms of just that rolling window. A lot of the push was in 2020, so if I look back, or in the beginnings of 2020, so if I look back in that 3-year window, that's now shrunk in terms of the weight, and it started to fall, it's gotten flatter. But 18%, folks, in the housing market over 3 years is not terrible. The thing is about the way we think about our houses, though, is when we hear that people are making 20, 30, 40% on their homes from where we all thought it should have been, 2019 or 2020, if I only make 25, I have a stomachache for 6 months, right? Or when I think it's only going to be 18% growth, it's like, oh my God, we left all this money on the table, okay? So one of the things that leads to housing market changes is whether or not you're going to profit from your home, but we usually need labor market changes to trigger that change, because you have to think about all the opportunity costs of actually moving and selling your home. And with interest rates the way they are, and this is really the connectivity here, we haven't seen labor market changes to force home sales. We haven't seen a lot of existing units come up as a result of that. We haven't had a lot of building. Building permits have continued to truck along in Sonoma County, about 2,300 a year over the last couple of years. But most of that has been in multifamily, not in single family, so the inventories remain relatively tight. And then the third is if you do leave your home, or you're leaving maybe a 3.5% mortgage for 7. So you're changing your cost of housing, and without a labor market spark, you probably are not going to make that choice. So we're seeing just some sort of, I want to say mean reversion, because that's probably a little bit too strong of a way of thinking about this at this point, but probably some comeback to maybe where trends should have been. But this is still pretty good. And if you look at places like San Diego and Santa Barbara County have gone absolutely nuts in terms of their housing markets. They've built very little. They've had a flock of people coming in from other places all around the world to live there and basically work remotely. And if I had shown you this graph from 6 months ago, those would have been pushing up on 50% growth over the last 3 years. So when we think about expense here and what it costs for a home here, in Marin County it's about $1.4 million at the median. Okay, and that when I say median, I mean if I plucked a 3 and 2 in Novato that's 1,800 square feet, that's going to sell for about $1.3 million. That's what it's like right now. So we have to have some perspective on that. The forecast is relatively pessimistic, at least for right now. But this forecast, if you hear about a housing forecast, you generally think about it with a grain of salt. It has been rolling all over the place because of thoughts about interest rates, what that means for mortgage rates, are we going to see more construction, what's going to happen in terms of labor markets, and will that trigger an increase in existing units going on market? The supposition is we will see a little bit more existing unit activity in 2024 because people will start to lose their jobs, and when that happens, we're going to see a little bit of a come down in prices. But none of this is that dramatic over the next year in terms of the range in California is basically from flat down to about 7%. Mendocino County is a very strange situation. Mendocino County's got pessimism all over the place in terms of housing data and the forecast. And a lot of that's because of what's happened in the cannabis markets and how that's changed fortunes in Mendocino County, kind of underneath the surface of the water. And just thinking about where Mendocino County is in terms of it's pinched between Humboldt County, which has had a relatively strong infusion of cash from the state of California to turn Humboldt State University into a Cal Poly, and how that sort of spread its wings into the most populated portions of Humboldt County, and Sonoma County, which is kind of at the higher, or the most northern end of what happens in the Bay Area. So Mendocino County still has that problem, and in fact, if you look at Mendocino County's labor market, it has struggled to recover the jobs it lost as a result of the dot-com recession, much less the Great Recession. The change in Mendocino County is now decades long, unfortunately. Okay, so let's talk about some leadership challenges. One is rental burden. So one of the housing advocates most a favorite piece of data for housing advocates is rental burden. In other words, what percentage of households are paying at least 30% of their gross monthly income for rent? And so in 2011, these were the numbers for California. About 55%, about 56 actually percent of renters in California in 2011 were paying at least 30% of their gross monthly income in rent, according to census. Okay? That slipped over the 2010s and then slipped again in 2022, the latest data which just came out in December. Part of that's because we saw incomes pick up in California, and that helped out kind of rebalance a little bit, but it's still just about half. Okay? So even with rents rising, incomes rose a little faster, and part of that was inflation. So inflation kicked up wages, which helped renters out marginally, but it's still about 50%. If you look at Sonoma County, it's been pretty consistent. It's been between, let's say, 54 and 55 for over a decade. And if I took you back to 2000, they would be down in the 40s somewhere, but in the high 40s. Okay? So rental burden is looked at as, can't we build more rental housing and provide price relief? Right? This is usually, these data are the ones that come to the fore. So be watching for this as an argument for more multifamily units in a way of creating affordability. The reality of it is that it's very hard to build yourself out of a problem in a place that has global demand to live. Okay? So if you think about Marin County is kind of the poster child for lack of housing affordability, like I just told you. Housing, rental, and the median rent in Marin County right now is about $3,200 a month. And that's for the entire inventory of rental, but most of it's 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. Okay, so you got to think about, okay, what's that mean? It means that if you want to live, if you think about 30% of your income at $3,000, that means you're minimum making about $100,000 just to kind of get over that burden. Let's talk briefly about commercial real estate. This might be a little hard to see in the back. The upshot of this graph is the following. There are data coming out now of key swipes that are happening in major metro areas for office buildings as a way of trying to think about how people are coming back to the office or not. So this red dotted line I'm going to show you here are the aggregate key swipes in the metro areas of the United States at February 2020. So that's kind of the pre-pandemic benchmark of the millions of key swipes that took place. Those other graphs are the evolution of the high, median, and low, or in essence, the distribution of data that this company is tracking for key swipes across the metro areas of the United States to July 2023. So about 60% at the high, about 50% at the median. And the question is will people come back to the office en masse in metro areas? And for us here in Sonoma County, I'm really thinking Sonoma, Marin, and Napa, that might not be that big of a deal, but let's think about what that really means regionally. Let's say that San Francisco gets to about 75% reutilization of office space and then holds more or less permanently based on either corporate policy, a lack of demand, or some mix. What does that mean in concentric circles around the businesses that serve those office spaces in San Francisco that are owned by people that live in Marin, Napa, Sonoma counties? How much the flow of people that come into San Francisco, or just let's say the core Bay Area, for business meetings and then flow toward wine country and demand in their wake? How connected are these areas is going to be tested over the next 7 or 8 years, maybe because we do not see a reutilization of those commercial spaces and those concentric circles of problems that will radiate out based on that problem. Now, you could say that they overbuilt based on what had to be a technological change at some point, but it really forced that change. Now, a way of also seeing that forced change is how many people work from home. So in 2019, this is Marin County to 2022. So pre-pandemic, about 12.5%, according to census, of people that live in Marin County and have a job were doing that job from home. So just about 1 in 8. Okay, that's now over double that in 2022. So we've seen a real change, but that's not shocking. If you know Marin County, it's not flabbergasting that maybe 1 in 4 people in Marin County work from home that live in Marin County. Okay, this is Sonoma County. So Sonoma County had about 8%, and then has gone up now to just under 14, according to census. Now, if you look at the 1 year, these are 5-year rolling averages, which I like to use because it's a larger sample size, so it's probably a little bit less than reality. But if you look at the latest data in the 1-year census survey, it's actually gone back down a little bit, but it's not going to change, let's say, the broader trend. So we're seeing that trend, but here's the point. What does this mean for residential real estate and commercial real estate in Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties if this is happening here? And this is among the highest. So Marin County is the second highest in the United States for a county that has at least 250,000 people in it. And this is California on average. So Sonoma County is basically tracking with the state on average. And folks, just as a little data sidebar, if you look at the forecast for California and the economic actualities of the California economy, and you look at Sonoma County historically, we track the state economy very, very closely. So when you hear about a forecast of California as a state, it trying to get over that burden. Let's talk briefly about commercial real estate. This might be a little hard to see in the back. The upshot of this graph is the following. There are data coming out now of key swipes that are happening in major metro areas for office buildings as a way of trying to think about how people are coming back to the office or not. So this red dotted line I'm going to show you here are the aggregate key swipes in the metro areas of the United States at February 2020. So that's kind of the pre-pandemic benchmark of the millions of key swipes that took place. Those other graphs are the evolution of the high, median, and low, or in essence, the distribution of data that this company is tracking for key swipes across the metro areas of the United States to July 2023. So about 60% at the high, about 50% at the median. And the question is will people come back to the office en masse in metro areas? And for us here in Sonoma County, I'm really thinking Sonoma, Marin, and Napa, that might not be that big of a deal, but let's think about what that really means regionally. Let's say that San Francisco gets to about 75% reutilization of office space and then holds more or less permanently based on either corporate policy, a lack of demand, or some mix. What does that mean in concentric circles around the businesses that serve those office spaces in San Francisco that are owned by people that live in Marin, Napa, Sonoma counties? How much the flow of people that come into San Francisco, or let's say the core Bay Area, for business meetings and then flow toward wine country and demand in their wake? How connected are these areas is going to be tested over the next 7 or 8 years, maybe because we do not see a reutilization of those commercial spaces and those concentric circles of problems that will radiate out based on that problem. Now, you could say that they overbuilt based on what had to be a technological change at some point, but it really forced that change. Now, a way of also seeing that forced change is how many people work from home. So in 2019, this is Marin County to 2022. So pre-pandemic, about 12.5%, according to census, of people that live in Marin County and have a job were doing that job from home. So just about 1 in 8. Okay, that's now over double that in 2022. So we've seen a real change, but that's not shocking. If you know Marin County, it's not flabbergasting that maybe 1 in 4 people in Marin County work from home that live in Marin County. Okay, this is Sonoma County. So Sonoma County had about 8%, and that has gone up now to just under 14, according to census. Now, if you look at the 1 year, these are 5-year rolling averages, which I like to use because it's a larger sample size, so it's probably a little bit less than reality. But if you look at the latest data in the 1-year census survey, it's actually gone back down a little bit, but it's not going to change, let's say, the broader trend. So we're seeing that trend, but here's the point. What does this mean for residential real estate and commercial real estate in Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties if this is happening here? And this is among the highest. So Marin County is the second highest in the United States for a county that has at least 250,000 people in it. And this is California on average. So Sonoma County is basically tracking with the state on average. And folks, just as a little data sidebar, if you look at the forecast for California and the economic actualities of the California economy, and you look at Sonoma County historically, we track the state economy very, very closely. So when you hear about a forecast of California as a state, it generally is a good way of tracking what's going to happen in Sonoma County, from a job market standpoint, an income standpoint, and a housing market standpoint, generally speaking. Okay, so what I want to do now is to wrap up and talk about population change. We got some other data that happened in December that I think are relevant to thinking about leadership challenges that are coming. This is the age distribution of the population in California in 2011. This is the Sonoma County, and this is Marin County. Now, when you look at this, think of this. That middle portion, 25 to 54 years old, is sort of the prime working age population, okay? So this is actually not a bad spread, but you can see, let me walk backward, You can see that it's a little bit more weighted for California than Sonoma County, which has a little bit older, and then Marin County, which has a little bit older. Now, hopefully this is going to work. I tried to get the animation right so that there's a little bit of drama here. This is 2022. So watch what happens. Look at the far right-hand side. Right? Look at the 65 to 75 crowd. See how it is now? Same axis on the vertical. That's what's happened in the last 11 years. And if you think about the way that these two counties, and Napa County is almost as bad in terms of the aging or getting older at a faster pace. If you see it that way from just a pure labor market standpoint, I don't mean to be ageist. The point is that when you are thinking about hiring and you see a population and really kind of a labor pool that's aging, if you are an industry that tends to hire on the younger side, that's going to make for a trickier labor market environment. And so if you look at people that are working, you will see older people working jobs that used to be populated by relatively younger people. So that leads to two items that think about from a leadership standpoint. One is that has to mean that we've aged as a community, and we know that that's true. These data just sort of corroborate that. But the second is that when people are aging here, they may not be able to afford here, so they're working to a later age. And I didn't want to take more time here on the data, but if you actually look at the age profile of workers in Sonoma County and Marin County, Napa County, they have steadily aged toward 55, 65, 75-year-olds still remaining in the workforce. And the median age of the workers in Marin County and Sonoma County and Napa County is now over 45 years old. California is about to get over that burden. Let's talk briefly about commercial real estate. This might be a little hard to see in the back. The upshot of this graph is the following. There are data coming out now of key swipes that are happening in major metro areas for office buildings as a way of trying to think about how people are coming back to the office or not. So this red dotted line I'm going to show you here are the aggregate key swipes in the metro areas of the United States at February 2020. So that's kind of the pre-pandemic benchmark of the millions of key swipes that took place. Those other graphs are the evolution of the high, median, and low, or in essence, the distribution of data that this company is tracking for key swipes across the metro areas of the United States to July 2023. So about 60% at the high, about 50% at the median. And the question is will people come back to the office en masse in metro areas? And for us here in Sonoma County, I'm really thinking Sonoma, Marin, and Napa, that might not be that big of a deal, but let's think about what that really means regionally. Let's say that San Francisco gets to about 75% reutilization of office space and then holds more or less permanently based on either corporate policy, a lack of demand, or some mix. What does that mean in concentric circles around the businesses that serve those office spaces in San Francisco that are owned by people that live in Marin, Napa, Sonoma counties? How much the flow of people that come into San Francisco, or let's say the core Bay Area, for business meetings and then flow toward wine country and demand in their wake? How connected are these areas is going to be tested over the next 7 or 8 years, maybe because we do not see a reutilization of those commercial spaces and those concentric circles of problems that will radiate out based on that problem. Now, you could say that they overbuilt based on what had to be a technological change at some point, but it really forced that change. Now, a way of also seeing that forced change is how many people work from home and get over that burden. Let's talk briefly about commercial real estate. This might be a little hard to see in the back. The upshot of this graph is the following. There are data coming out now of key swipes that are happening in major metro areas for office buildings as a way of trying to think about how people are coming back to the office or not. So this red dotted line I'm going to show you here are the aggregate key swipes in the metro areas of the United States at February 2020. So that's kind of the pre-pandemic benchmark of the millions of key swipes that took place. Those other graphs are the evolution of the high, median, and low, or in essence, the distribution of data that this company is tracking for key swipes across the metro areas of the United States to July 2023. So about 60% at the high, about 50% at the median. And the question is will, and it'll be intriguing how the housing debate and the commercial real estate utilization start to come together in ways that we've already seen in certain places. And if you've been part of the theater that happens in county and city chambers over the last 10 or 15 years in the North Bay, There's been a lot of people who would say, well, why don't we just take that abandoned office space and turn it into housing, which is not easy to do, and not necessarily the right thing to do with the capital. So watch for those debates, though, to continue to go up, because I'm still looking at 25, 30% vacancy. Why don't we do this? Because we know we need it. Watch for those arguments to continue. We should also expect housing to be the topic statewide. So we've heard a lot about 1.1, 1.5 billion or million units to be built over the next 6-7 years. We are not on that trend. We're probably going to end up about 700,000 or 800,000 instead, and that's assuming we don't have any real economic wobble to change the way developers look at it. But my take is that if you don't provide developers with an incentive to build, they don't have an incentive to build. So you can't just say, well, we're going to build 1.1 million. Where are the incentives to make that happen from an economic standpoint if the cost of doing business has gone up and interest rates have gone up and population has changed in such a way that I don't know what the residential real estate demand is going to be? So it's just sometimes funny to listen. I know there's some elected officials in the room to some of the things that are said. So for Sonoma County, we should be watching, where will we be in 2030? So the other debate is we get very, I want to say, hyper focused on the today sometimes. And I try to stay present. I have my wife at home saying, you need to be more present. That's true. But we need to be thinking about where we're going to be in 2030. Right? So we think about, okay, we make these decisions now. What's that mean 7 or 8 years from now? If you look at what's happening with K-12 population forecast for the North Bay, they're all sinking alongside of the population change I just showed you. Okay? That has to mean fewer kids. What's that mean for our schools, how we fund them, the number of districts, and Sonoma County is an anomaly with the number of districts we have here, but we have to think in a broader sense about what that means, not now, but 5-10 years from now. We should expect energy and life sciences to be the big technological movements forward. Those things are still there, there's still payoffs there. We will see how that goes. And Sonoma County and Marin County to a certain extent is too ready for that to happen. Napa County is talking about diversification in its economic base, and that may be where it finds some technological change. Okay, so with that, folks, I'll take your questions again. Thank you so much for having me today.
Rob, I have a question.
Sure.
You made reference to Sonoma County kind of tracking with the state as far as similar outcomes. With the migration away out of California, with the governor proposing yet another tax on the wealthy to hopefully address some of the mental health issues, addressing everybody in the state, what role do you see the $1 trillion unfunded pension liability playing moving forward? Because you didn't reference that at all.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up that question. So the unfunded liabilities that we face as cities, counties, and state are things we still have to reckon with, and we have made some gains over the last, let's say, 7 or 8 years, but we haven't made enough gains to where we can't think that that problem's just gone away. So you nailed it. One of the things we have to reckon with is what do we do with a population that's going to be a bigger swell of people to draw from those pensions over time and for a longer period of time if we don't have the base, the economic base to continue to fund it. It is a big question. It hasn't become a huge question again because the gains have been good enough for now, but the population change, and this is part of why the Department of Finance does those long-term forecasts, because it starts to feed into the modeling for CalPERS and for the state finance in terms of where we need to go from a tax policy standpoint. We have to expect taxes are going to go up in California. Unfortunately, that's just the outcome we're looking at. So the cost of living where we do and enjoying the weather we've had, for example, is going to go up. There's no other way of solving that problem, really, unless there's some mass change from a regulatory standpoint of what we're willing to pay pensioners. And that could lead to court battles for years.
Rob, you mentioned the agricultural community and its economic effect on cities and counties. Can you speak to tourism and kind of what the projection you see is for tourism if you've got deposits sinking, people spending money at a faster rate, et cetera, so.
Yeah, sure. So tourism in Sonoma County had a good year last year. Was not as good as 2022, but it was still good. It's kind of on that trend if you look at the data. Right now, if you look at tourism forecasts and you think about how tourism and the economy kind of walk together, we're expecting 2024 to be a pretty good year. Part of that might be geopolitically or might change due to geopolitics. For example, you might see people do less long-haul travel if the threats based around that long-haul travel are higher, and they just feel like they'd rather spend closer to home, or that if there is an economic contraction but people still want to get out over summer, they're going to stay closer to home, especially coming out of the Bay Area. So we might see some rebalancing in 2024 in terms of what might be seen as a lower year otherwise because of those other pieces. But right now we're kind of in the groove where you're probably going to see tourism continue to kind of stay on trend right now, not necessarily accelerate, but not fall by the wayside. That's kind of how I see it and what seems to be out there in terms of forecasts. A big deal in that, Howard, is actually what happens with international travelers, because that's still a hole that hasn't been refilled yet. And if we see that population come to California, and specifically to wine country, that could help also provide a little more support. You bet, no worries.
Rob, quick question. So, kind of two-part. If we talk about office utilization in San Francisco dropping and all the supporting businesses dropping, not enough people go, are bridge tolls going up because you got an expense that needs to be paid without the people paying it? And second part is, what's the state going to do with this budget deficit?
Great questions. Budget or bridge toll, yes, expected to continue to go up. And if nothing else, it's because the expenses inside of GGNRI, as one just example, are going to continue to rise. So that's not going to change, and we're going to keep having to pay for that. On the state budget side, we have a serious problem on our hands. But it's analogous to the problem with the pensions. Expect taxes to rise at some point because there's really not another solution. And that's a problem in an already relatively high tax state. So there's not a great way of solving that problem without basically everybody chipping in the short term, but you start to think about how is that possible if we had a $100 billion surplus 2 years ago. That goes away very quickly when you start to see deficits and also the restrictions on spending. So yeah, we do expect there's going to be a lot of talk about actually increasing taxes and looking toward the wealthy and toward business, unfortunately, as the first stops. Because politically that's a little bit easier to swallow than a general tax change. But expect it's coming.
Yes. Yes, I have two unrelated questions, but of course they're related to what you've been talking about.
Sure.
What is the effect going to be, or forecasted to be, on tourism with the expectations of more drastic climate changes? And then, how much effect does the nonprofit world have on the economy? That is many people are either working for or very engaged in nonprofits, and I just wondered how that fits into your picture of the economy. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. So on the climate change side, there's sort of two angles on what could be coming. One is that it's pessimistic in the sense that climate change will lead to a loss of tourism assets, which will slow down tourism and change it fundamentally because certain assets won't be anymore. The coastline will change in certain ways. We'll have more wildfires or other things that would keep tourism away. So that's the negative view. I think the more positive view is we could see more tourism as part of a business move to solve those problems and being a place where those solutions are provided. Yeah, so that's something I think is actually more likely than less. But at the same time, when you think about climate change and its ultimate effects, how it affects tourism will probably really not show its face if it is going to be negative for maybe 20 years. But,
and that's globally as well?
Yeah, so those things are, when I talk about those changes, then I mean globally and how tourism moves, and how tourism flows will change where they land in terms of the major tourism areas now if they start to lose assets. But we can fight that to a certain extent by maybe providing for a different type of tourist that's here for other reasons, especially if we become a place that is seen as a center of excellence around solutions to climate change or how you react to a problem like a wildfire.
Or maybe they're not coming from so far away.
And in other words, they're more localized tourism, but we need the wealth here to be able to provide that continuous demand as well.
And the nonprofits?
Oh, I'm sorry, you asked about the nonprofits also. So on the nonprofit side, the nonprofit organizations in Sonoma County are about 10% of the economy when you take public health or nonprofit health and nonprofit organizations that don't have anything to do with health into consideration. So it's a big deal here. Marin County is a little bit more than that. Napa County is getting closer to us in terms of the amount of the economy that's basically driven by nonprofits. So it is a big deal in terms of its place in the overall economy in terms of providing demand, and the other thing it does, it provides resources that come in from outside as donations. In terms of those resources would not be here but for those nonprofit organizations.
And no forecast of change?
No, not really. I mean, nonprofit organizations, as an industry goes, tend to move relatively slowly and kind of move with the wealth of the local area in some ways. So as long as we are continuing to see a more wealthy population continue rising, we'll probably see a slow and steady increase in nonprofits. We've seen that at least over the last 12 or 15 years, kind of track each other. Does that help?
Yeah, great.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Infrastructure, being a civil engineer, interests me. Do you have any clue about how our local governments, cities, counties, et cetera, have been dipping into the federal infrastructure funds, the CHIP Act, et cetera, and how much of an impact that would have around here?
Yeah, I haven't seen any data yet that suggests I know how much has come in. We know there's been a sprinkle of it here and there, and we're still spending ARRA money in certain places that are from 2009 on infrastructure that are just now starting to close the door. But there's really no data yet to say how the CHIPS Act or the IRA have really shown their face regionally here yet. We know that spending has started to slowly roll out, but some of that spending is stuck in Congress also.
Yeah.
So, but we have to expect at some point that we're going to have a larger demand to have those changes happen, and if that spending all goes through, we will see more visible change that's happened because of that spending here. But there's no data yet that I've seen that suggests how much has happened. I'm sorry that I have to be a little vague on that. Do we have another question? Go. Yeah.
In regards to the slide that showed Sonoma County population of workforce decreasing significantly over the next several years, you mentioned that Sonoma County was very similar to the state. What do you think the reason is that that's the big outlier when you compare it to the state and the Bay Area workforce population?
Yeah, so if you actually, those data were actually the total population of Sonoma County, not just the workforce. So I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that. But I think what you're seeing is the final seeds of how Napa, Sonoma, and Marin counties have evolved over the last 10 or 15 years now finally showing its face. So an older population, not have as many kids, cost of living is relatively high vis-a-vis the state of California. And so it's separating a little bit in terms of, let's say, the growth of population.
It doesn't mean that the evolution of the economy will change that much in terms of how the income we generated or the jobs availability and growth. It's probably just going to become smaller in terms of the total number of people working. Doesn't mean the incomes will change down. It just means the number of people working to generate those incomes will shrink. So that's maybe where you're going to see a little bit more separation. Does that help? Yeah, thank you. Okay, sure.
Well, Dr. Eyler, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. I look forward to seeing you in 2020, well, 2025. It's already 2024. It's going fast. I'd like to thank some of our elected officials for being here. Mark Stebbins, City Council of Santa Rosa, Ron Edwards, Hillsborough City Council, Nikisha Smith, City Manager of Santa Rosa, and Chief Cregan, the San Jose Police Department. Thank you for coming. Next month, we actually have a presentation on AI, so thank you for bringing that up. It's an impactful GMM with Ryan Kelly, one of our members, and his team. He's going to speak about artificial intelligence, the good, the bad, and unfortunately the scary. And can be with that, I want to thank all the guests for coming. I want to thank and encourage Sonoma County for you to join the Sonoma County Alliance. And we are a business advocacy organization. Our membership is what drives us, and your participation makes us great. So with that, thank you for coming, and look forward to seeing you on February 7th.